The cake was still warm when the envelope hit the table. It slid across the white tablecloth and stopped right in front of Lena Carter's plate, right beside the 18 candles that had just been blown out. For half a second, Lena thought it was another birthday card. Then she saw Mark's handwriting on the front. Her name. Full name. Too formal. Too cold. Across the dining room, no one was smiling anymore. Not really. The balloons floated above the table, red and silver, the kind you grab last minute from the grocery store. The smell of vanilla frosting hung thick in the air, almost sickly sweet. Lena's fingers hovered over the envelope. Something inside her chest had already started to sink. Mark stood at the head of the table, one hand still resting on the back of Evan's chair. His expression was calm in that careful way he used at work meetings, not at family dinners. Family dinners used to be softer, warmer. Not like this. "Open it," Mark said. Too smooth. Too prepared. Lena felt heat creep slowly up the back of her neck. Around the table sat the people she had spent nearly 2 decades trying to belong to. Diane Holloway, Mark's older sister, leaned back in her chair with her arms folded, lips pressed thin like she was holding something in. Evan, newly 18, did not look at Lena at all, just stared down at the table, jaw tight, shoulders stiff. That hurt more than anything else in the room, because Lena had been there for his first broken arm, his middle school science fair, the night he cried over his first real breakup, and tonight he would not even meet her eyes. Her fingers finally touched the envelope. The paper felt heavier than it should have. She slid one finger under the flap and pulled the contents free. Legal paper, stamped, official. Her eyes moved across the first line, then stopped. Petition for dissolution of marriage. The words did not make sense at first. They just floated there on the page like they belonged to someone else's life. Lena blinked once, twice, then slowly lifted her head. No one spoke. No one rushed to explain. They were watching her, waiting. Like this was the real event of the night, not the birthday, not the cake. Her throat tightened. "You served me divorce papers. Here." Her voice came out quieter than she expected. Mark finally exhaled. "We thought it was time. We, not I." Lena felt something small and fragile shift inside her chest. Not break, not yet, just move. Across the table, Diane leaned forward slightly, eyes sharp. "Better you hear it in front of family." The word family landed wrong. It always had. Lena swallowed carefully. Her hands were steady on the table, but inside, the first crack had already begun to spread. For a few seconds, Lena did not move. Not because she was calm, because her body had not caught up with what her eyes just read. The paper lay flat on the table in front of her. Clean, official. Final in a way that birthday candles never were. Somewhere in the kitchen, the refrigerator hummed, too loud in the silence. Lena became painfully aware of every small sound in the room, the faint squeak of Diane's chair, the soft tap of someone's fingernail against a glass, the slow, controlled breathing of the man she had been married to for 15 years. They were all waiting for the reaction, waiting for the moment she would prove whatever story they had already decided about her. Lena's fingers curled slightly against the edge of the table. Her first instinct rose fast and ugly in her throat. Say something sharp. Say something that cuts. Make this stop. She swallowed it down. Not yet. Her eyes lifted slowly to Mark. "You planned this." It was not a question. Mark shifted his weight just barely. Anyone else might have missed it. Lena did not. "We needed witnesses," he said. The word witnesses slid across her skin like ice. Not family, not support, witnesses. Her chest tightened one more notch. Across the table, Evan finally looked up. There was no hesitation in his face now. just a hard certainty that did not belong on someone who had blown out birthday candles less than 2 minutes ago. You really thought we would not find out? The accusation landed softly, but it landed. Lena turned her head toward him slowly. Her heartbeat picked up. Find out what? Evan let out a short breath through his nose. Not quite a laugh, not quite frustration. Something in between. You know exactly what. The room shifted again. Pressure building. Still vague, still circling. But closer now. Lena felt heat rise under her skin, the slow creeping kind that comes when something is deeply, painfully wrong. She forced her voice to stay level, then say it. For the first time that night, Diane moved fully forward in her chair. Her eyes were bright, almost eager. You have been moving money, Lena. There it was, the first clean accusation. It hit Lana like a sudden drop in an elevator. Her stomach flipped hard, not because she was guilty, because now she understood the shape of the trap. Mark finally met her eyes. 3 months of quiet distance sat heavy in his expression. We have the statements. Lena stared at him. Really stared. And in that moment, something inside her cracked open just enough to let a thin line of cold clarity through. Statements. Plural. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a case they thought they had already built. Her pulse thudded hard in her ears. Slowly, carefully, Lena reached for the stack of papers again. Her hand trembled once halfway there. Evan saw it. His mouth tightened, like the movement confirmed something for him. Lena hated that. Hated that small flicker of satisfaction she saw pass through his face. She picked up the documents and flipped the top page. Legal language, dates, account numbers. Her eyes moved quickly, then slower, then stopped. Because the account number listed on the second page was familiar. Too familiar. A cold weight settled low in her stomach, but her face did not change. Not yet. Inside, her thoughts began to move faster, careful, piece by piece, like someone walking through a dark room they suddenly realized had been rearranged. Across the table, Diane's voice cut in again. You do not even look surprised. Lena lifted her eyes slowly. For a split second, something raw flashed across her face. Not guilt, something closer to hurt. You think I stole from this family? Her voice was quieter now, rougher around the edges. Mark did not answer immediately. That hesitation hurt more than a yes would have. Evan leaned forward slightly. The edge in his voice was sharper now. We know you did. And there it was, the moment the room had been waiting for, the moment they thought would make her crumble. Lena Carter sat very still in her chair, divorce papers under one hand, financial accusations hanging in the air around her. And for the first time that night, her breathing changed. Slower, deeper. Not the breath of someone cornered. The breath of someone who had just realized something very important. Because the number on that statement was not what they thought it was. And suddenly, beneath the humiliation, beneath the shock, beneath the slow burn of betrayal, Lena felt the first small flicker of something they were not expecting. Not fear, something colder, something patient. And it had just woken up. The silence stretched too long. Lena let it. She kept her eyes on the statement in her hand, reading the same line twice, then a third time, making sure her memory was not playing tricks on her. It was the same account, but not the way they thought. Her thumb pressed lightly against the edge of the paper, a small, controlled movement to keep her hand from shaking again. Across the table, Diane misread the pause immediately. That smug little tilt came back to her mouth. Nothing to say now. The words were soft, but the satisfaction behind them was loud. Lena lifted her head slowly. Her face was calm. Too calm for what they expected. I am thinking, she said quietly. Mark's brow tightened just a fraction. About what? Lena set the paper down carefully, lining the edges with the tablecloth like she needed the order. "About why none of you asked me first." That landed differently. A small shift in the room. Not enough to break their certainty, but enough to wrinkle it. Evan's jaw flexed. "We did not need to ask." His voice carried that same hard edge from before, but underneath it Lena caught something new. Nervous energy. Young, unsteady. "You were moving money out of the household account," he continued. "Large amounts, repeatedly." Lena nodded once, slow, yes. The single word hit the table harder than anyone expected. Diane straightened immediately. "There it is." Mark's shoulders went rigid. Evan leaned forward. "So you admit it." Lena finally looked directly at him. Really looked. At the boy she had once sat beside on the living room floor, helping with math homework. At the young man, now staring at her like she was someone he had already decided to lose. Her chest tightened in a way she refused to show. "I said yes," she replied evenly. "I did not say you understand it." That pause came back. Thicker this time. Diane's eyes narrowed. "There is no other way to understand it." Lena exhaled slowly through her nose. Her heart was still beating too fast, but something inside her had shifted from shock into something more controlled, more deliberate. She reached forward and slid the statement gently across the table toward Mark. "You should read the dates again." Mark did not touch the paper right away. "Why?" Lena held his gaze. "Because if you are going to end a 15-year marriage at a birthday dinner, you should at least be precise." That stung. She saw it land. Mark's jaw tightened as he finally pulled the document closer. His eyes dropped to the numbers. Diane leaned over his shoulder immediately, already impatient. Evan watched Lena instead. Carefully, like he was waiting for the mask to slip. For the first time that night, Lena felt something ugly twist in her chest. Not anger, something sadder. Because he truly believed this. He was not performing, he was convinced. That realization hurt in a quiet, heavy way she had not prepared for. Mark's eyes moved slowly down the page, then back up, then down again. A small crease formed between his brows. So small, most people would miss it. Lena did not. Diane noticed too. "What?" Her voice was sharp now. Mark did not answer immediately. He flipped to the second page. His posture had changed just slightly. Less certain. The air in the room shifted a single degree. Not enough for anyone to relax, but enough for Lena to feel it. There was a long pause. Then Diane snapped. "Well," Mark finally spoke, slower than before. "These transfers." He hesitated. Lena felt her pulse thud once, hard. "Say it." "They started almost 2 years ago." Lena nodded once. "Yes." Diane frowned. "That does not change anything." But Mark was still staring at the page. His certainty was no longer clean. Something was catching in it now, something small, something inconvenient. Lena folded her hands calmly in front of her. Her voice stayed quiet. "You might want to check what else started 2 years ago. That was the first real crack. It was small, barely visible, but everyone in the room felt it, and for the first time since the envelope hit the table. The night stopped moving exactly the way they had planned. The temperature in the room did not actually change, but Lena felt it. That small shift that happens when certainty begins to loosen its grip. Mark was still staring at the paper. Too long. Diane noticed first. Her voice came out sharper than before. What else started 2 years ago? Lena did not answer right away. She could feel her pulse in her throat now, not panicked, not wild, controlled, careful, because this was the edge. Push too fast and they would shut down. Push too soft and they would keep rolling over her. She rested her palms lightly on the table. 2 years ago, she said quietly, was when Evan broke his wrist at school. Evan's head jerked slightly. The reaction was small, but it was there. Diane frowned immediately. What does that have to do with anything? Lena kept her eyes on Mark, because that was also when the new medical account was opened. Silence. Thick. Heavy. Mark's fingers tightened slightly on the edge of the statement. Diane leaned closer. Medical account. Her tone had lost some of its bite. Just a little. Lena nodded once. For Evan's follow-up care, physical therapy, a specialist in Plano was not covered fully by the main insurance. Evan's jaw shifted. Confusion flickered there now, quick and uncertain. But Diane pushed forward. That does not explain repeated transfers. Lena expected that. She had been waiting for that. Of course it does not, she said softly. And that was the moment her voice almost betrayed her. Because under the calm, something else was pressing hard against her ribs now. Not fear, not exactly. Something closer to exhaustion. 18 years. 18 years of trying to fit into a space that had never fully opened for her. She reached slowly toward the stack again. Her fingers trembled once. This time, she did not fully hide it. Mark noticed. His eyes flicked up to her face. For the first time that night, there was something there that had not been present before. Not trust, but hesitation. Lena slid one page free and turned it toward him. Look at the memo line. Mark's brow tightened. He leaned closer. Diane leaned with him. Evan stayed still, watching Lena instead of the paper, always watching her. Mark's eyes moved slowly across the line, then stopped, his lips parted slightly. Diane's voice came fast. What? Mark did not answer immediately. He was still reading, still processing. Lena could almost hear the gears turning in his head. Not fast. Mark had never been fast when something complicated challenged what he already believed, but steady, careful. Diane's patience snapped. Mark, he finally spoke. These are labeled. Lena nodded once. Yes. The word was quiet, almost tired. Diane leaned further over the page. Her eyes scanned quickly, then again, her mouth tightened. Even with labels, she said sharply, money was still moved without discussion. There it was, the fallback position. Lena had expected that, too. She drew in a slow breath. The air felt thick in her lungs. Because now came the part she hated most, the part that would make her look weak, out of control, messy, but it was the truth. I did try to discuss it, she said. Mark's head lifted slowly. When? Lena held his gaze. Last summer, after the second round of therapy bills came in. The memory hit her hard and without warning. Standing in the kitchen at 6:43 a.m., coffee going cold in her hand. Mark half listening while scrolling through emails. Her stomach twisted. You said we would talk about it later. Mark's expression flickered. Small, but real. Diane cut in quickly. That still does not explain the full amounts. Her voice was pushing again, trying to drag control back into place. Lena felt something sharp twist in her chest. Because this was the moment. The moment where she could either stay quiet and let them keep their clean story about her, or say the part that made everything uglier. Her fingers curled slowly against the edge of the table. For the first time that night, her voice roughened. Because the therapy bills were not the only thing. The room went very still. Mark's shoulders stiffened. Evan's eyes narrowed. Diane's expression sharpened like a blade being lifted. What else? Lena hesitated. Just long enough for the old instinct to whisper, do not say it. Do not make this worse. But that instinct had cost her too much already. Her throat tightened. Then she said quietly, the account was also covering the college evaluation testing. Evan froze. Completely. The reaction was instant and unmistakable. Diane blinked. What testing? Lena finally looked directly at Evan, and for the first time that night the calm in her eyes cracked just enough to show something raw underneath. The learning assessment your school recommended, and you asked me not to tell your father about. The room did not just go quiet. It dropped. like the floor had shifted half an inch beneath everyone's feet, and suddenly, this was no longer the clean story they thought they were telling. The silence this time was different. Not the tight, expectant quiet from earlier. This one had weight. Evan did not move. For a full 3 seconds, he just stared at Lena like she had spoken in a language no one else understood. Then his shoulders went stiff. "You were not supposed to bring that up." His voice was low, tight. The first real crack in his certainty. Diane's head snapped between them. What is she talking about? Evan did not answer her. His eyes stayed locked on Lena. A flicker of something uncomfortable moved across his face. Not anger, not yet. Embarrassment. Mark noticed it too. His brow pulled together slowly. What testing? The question came out more cautious this time. Less confident. Lena felt her chest tighten hard. This was the part she had protected for 2 years. Protected even when the bills piled up. Even when the late-night anxiety sat heavy in her stomach. Even when Evan had stopped talking to her after the first round of results. Her fingers pressed lightly into the table. "You remember sophomore year," she said gently, when the school counselor suggested a full learning evaluation. Evan's jaw flexed. "Do not." The word came out fast. Too fast. Diane's eyes sharpened immediately. Suggested for what? No one answered right away. The hum of the refrigerator came back into focus. Too loud again. Mark's voice dropped lower. "Evan." It was not a question. It was a warning. Evan finally looked at his father. For the first time that night, the hard certainty in his face looked younger. Less controlled. It was nothing, he muttered. Lena's chest pulled tight because she knew that tone. The same one he used at 14 when he insisted his arm did not hurt that bad. The same one at 16 when he swore he did not need help with math anymore. Always pushing the struggle down until it had nowhere else to go. Lena spoke carefully. It was not nothing. Evan's head snapped back toward her. Stop! But she could not stop now. Not with divorce papers still sitting in front of her. Not with theft accusations still hanging in the air. The assessment showed processing delays in written comprehension and timed testing. The words landed softly, but the effect was immediate. Evan's face flushed dark. Diane blinked. Mark went very still. Lena forced herself to keep going, even though her throat had started to tighten again. The specialist recommended extended time accommodations and targeted tutoring before college placement exams. Mark's fingers slowly loosened their grip on the paper. Why was I not told? The question was quiet, too quiet. Evan looked down at the table. His voice dropped. "Because I did not want you to know." There it was, raw, unfiltered. The room shifted again. Not toward Lena, toward something much more complicated. Mark leaned back slowly in his chair, processing, recalculating. Diane's expression had lost some of its sharp edge, but not all of it. That still does not explain why money was moved without transparency. She was not ready to let go yet. Lena expected that. Her stomach twisted, but her voice stayed steady, because he asked me to keep it private until he turned 18. Evan's head lifted sharply, shock flashing across his face. I said I would protect your privacy," Lena replied softly. "And I did." Her chest ached now, deep and slow, because this was the truth they had never seen. Not the quiet appointments, not the late-night practice tests, not the way Evan used to sit at the kitchen table at midnight, jaw tight, trying to finish reading assignments that took him twice as long as everyone else. Mark's voice came slower now. "Careful. How much of the transfers were for this?" Lena met his eyes directly. "Most of the early ones. Not all. Honesty, clean, uncomfortable, exactly where the room was now drifting." Diane opened her mouth again, ready to push. But this time, No one was fully certain the ground under them was as solid as it had been 20 minutes ago. The room did not explode. Lena had almost expected it to. Years of tension usually did not unwind quietly, but instead the energy shifted into something slower, heavier. Mark was no longer looking at Lena like the decision was already finished. Now he was looking between her and Evan, calculating, rebuilding the timeline in his head. Evan stayed very still in his chair, too still. His fingers were curled tight against the edge of the table, knuckles pale, shoulders locked high near his ears like he was bracing for impact. Diane was the only one still leaning forward aggressively. Her voice cut into the silence. Even if that explained some of it, it does not explain everything. There it was, the last piece she was still gripping. Lena did not flinch. She had been waiting for that line too, because Diane was not wrong. Not completely. Lena drew in a slow breath. The frosting on the cake had started to soften under the warm lights. One corner was sliding slightly, a slow sag no one else seemed to notice. Her eyes lingered on it for half a second. Then she looked back at Mark. "You are right," she said quietly. That caught them off guard. All of them. Diane blinked first. Mark's brow tightened. Evan's head lifted just a fraction. Lena folded her hands together on the table, pressing her fingers into each other to keep the small tremor from returning. Not all of the transfers were for the testing and therapy. The air tightened again. Diane leaned in immediately, sensing momentum. Then what were they for? Her voice carried a sharp edge of victory. Lena felt the old instinct rise again. Stay quiet. Keep the peace. Do not make the room uglier. But the envelope was still sitting in front of her. The divorce papers. The witnesses. The careful setup. They had already decided who she was. Her throat tightened. Then she spoke. "Last winter, your father's insurance lapsed for 3 months." The words landed softly, but Evan reacted instantly. His head snapped up. "What?" Mark's expression changed too, sharp confusion cutting through his face. "That is not—" "It is in the mail records," Lena said gently. "You were between policy renewals after the company changed providers." Mark went still. Completely still. Because now he remembered. Lena saw it happen in real time. The brief gap, the late notices, the stack of unopened envelopes that had sat on the kitchen counter while he was traveling. Diane's voice came slower now. "What does that have to do with moving money?" Lena exhaled slowly. "Because your father's cardiology follow-up was scheduled right in the middle of that gap." The room shifted hard. Mark's eyes locked onto her. "What follow-up?" Lena held his gaze. "The one after your stress test flagged irregular rhythm last November. The silence that followed was not the same as before. This one carried weight, real weight." Evan turned slowly toward his father. "Dad." Mark's jaw had tightened hard. "I remember the stress test." His voice was lower now, careful, controlled in that way Lena had seen before when something unsettled him deeply. Lena nodded once. The follow-up imaging was not fully covered during the gap window. Diane frowned, but that was handled through the clinic billing. Lena's fingers pressed lightly into the table again. This was the part she had never planned to say out loud, not like this, not in front of everyone. But the night had already crossed that line. Part of it was, she said quietly. Part of it was not. Mark was staring at her now, really staring. The certainty from earlier was gone, completely gone. "Why did you not tell me?" The question came out rough, not accusatory, something more unsettled than that. Lena felt something twist painfully behind her ribs, because the answer was ugly, and human, and not flattering. "Because you said we were already stretched thin after Evan's tutoring started." Her voice softened despite herself. You told me not to add anything unnecessary until the new quarter. Mark's face shifted, the memory landing. Hard. Diane's posture had changed too, less aggressive, more uncertain. Lena forced herself to finish the truth. So I covered the balance temporarily and planned to move it back once the insurance adjusted. Evan was staring at her now. Not with anger, not with certainty, with something far more uncomfortable. Something that looked a lot like doubt. The cake in the center of the table had begun to lean slightly to one side, the frosting sliding slowly under the warm lights. No one reached to fix it, because for the first time that night, the clean story they thought they were telling about Lena Carter was starting to come apart at the edges. No one touched the cake. It sat in the center of the table, frosting slowly slipping toward one edge, candles already burned down into uneven stubs. Lena noticed everything. She always did when the room got this tense. Mark was no longer sitting like a man who had already made up his mind. His shoulders had dropped slightly, not relaxed, just less certain. Evan kept staring at Lena. The anger that had been so sharp earlier now looked tangled with something else, something he clearly did not like feeling. Diane was the last one still holding her ground, but even she had leaned back a few inches. Her voice came out tighter than before. Even if all that is true, she paused, choosing her words more carefully now. You still moved large amounts without documenting it clearly to the family. There it was, the last clean angle she had. Lena did not argue, because Diane was not entirely wrong. Her fingers slid slowly across the table until they rested near the edge of the paperwork again. You are right, she said quietly. The admission landed heavier this time. Mark's eyes flicked up. Evan's posture stiffened again. Diane leaned forward, quick to grab the opening. So you admit you handled it poorly? Lena inhaled slowly. The air in her chest felt tight. Yes. The word came out plain, unprotected, because this part was not something she could soften, not something she could dress up to look better than it was. For a moment, no one spoke. The honesty had shifted the room into unfamiliar territory. Mark rubbed once slowly across his jaw. Thinking. Always thinking when something did not line up cleanly. Why, he finally asked, did you not at least send me the full breakdown? Lena's stomach tightened because that answer was not clean, not neat, human, messy. Her eyes dropped briefly to the table, then lifted again. Because every time I tried to bring up finances this year, you said you would review it later. Mark's expression flickered, small but visible. Evan's eyes moved slowly between them. Lena continued, her voice steady but thinner now, and after a while, later never came. The words sat heavy between them. Not an accusation, not a defense, just a quiet truth that had been building for months. Diane crossed her arms again, but the sharp confidence from earlier had dulled. That still does not justify secrecy. Lena nodded. No. Another clean admission. Evan shifted in his chair, restless now, uncomfortable in a way that had nothing to do with anger. Then why did you not just tell me directly? He asked, suddenly. His voice was rougher now, more personal, not the polished certainty from earlier. Lana looked at him fully, really looked, and for the first time that night, the control on her face slipped just enough to show something raw underneath. Because you were already overwhelmed. The words were soft, careful. Evan froze. You were barely sleeping before midterms, Lena continued gently. You were frustrated with the testing process. Every conversation about school was already turning into a fight. Her chest tightened as the memories came back. Late night pacing in the hallway. Half-finished practice exams. The way Evan used to press his fingers hard into his temples when reading blocks of text. So I chose to handle what I could quietly. Silence spread again, but this time it was not sharp. It was heavy. Mark leaned back slowly in his chair, processing everything again from the beginning. Diane's posture had lost its earlier bite, and Evan was no longer looking at Lena like she was the enemy. Now he looked like someone standing in the middle of a story that suddenly did not make sense anymore. The envelope with the divorce papers still sat on the table, unmoved, unclaimed. And for the first time since the candles were blown out, the outcome of this night was no longer as certain as anyone in the room had expected. The room had gone quiet in a different way now. Not the sharp silence from earlier. This one felt uneven, like the ground under everyone's feet was no longer level. Mark was the first to move. Slowly, he pulled the stack of financial pages closer again, his eyes moving more carefully this time. Not hunting, checking, rechecking. Lena watched him without speaking. Her heart was still beating too fast, but the panic from earlier had faded into something steadier, still painful, still exhausting, but clearer. Across the table, Evan shifted in his chair. The rigid anger that had filled his shoulders earlier was gone. Now there was the tension of a different kind. Restless, unsettled. Diane noticed it too, and she did not like it. Her voice came out sharper than the room now required. We are drifting away from the real issue. Mark did not look up. What real issue? Diane leaned forward again, trying to pull control back into her hands. The pattern of transfers. The amounts increased over time. That was what raised the concern in the first place. Lena's stomach tightened slightly. That part was true. The amounts had increased. Because the situation had changed. Because life had gotten messier. Because quiet fixes have a way of growing when no one is really listening. Mark finally spoke, still looking at the papers. The larger transfers started about 8 months ago. Lena nodded once. Yes. Diane's eyes sharpened again. There. Her finger tapped once lightly against the table. That is exactly the period we flagged. Mark finally lifted his head. His expression was no longer confident. It was careful. Why did the amounts increase then? The question was steady, direct. Lena felt a slow pull in her chest. Because this was the piece she had hoped they would never drag into the open. Not because it was wrong, because it was complicated. And human. And easy to misread if someone was already looking for a villain. Her fingers curled loosely together. 8 months ago, she said quietly, was when Evan's college testing timeline accelerated. Evan's shoulders tightened again, but he did not interrupt this time. Lena continued. The specialist recommended a more intensive prep cycle before the placement exams, more sessions, more materials. The costs stacked quickly. Mark's eyes narrowed slightly. You never showed me those invoices. There was no accusation in his voice now, just confusion. Lena's throat tightened. I sent the first set to your work email in February. Mark's brow pulled together. I do not remember seeing them. A small, tired breath left Lena's chest. Because you were in Chicago that week dealing with the merger review. The memory landed. She saw it happen in his face. The long nights, the rushed phone calls, the half-answered conversations in the kitchen. Diane crossed her arms tighter. Even if that is true, there are still gaps in the reporting. She was still searching, still trying to hold on to the version of events that had brought them all to this table. Lena did not argue. Instead, she reached slowly toward the folder again. There is something else you should probably look at. Mark's eyes flicked up. What? Lena slid one of the later pages free and turned it toward him. Her hand was steadier now. Not because she felt safe, because she was tired of being the only one in the room not fully heard. Check the source column on the last 2 entries. Mark leaned forward. His eyes moved down the page, then stopped. His brow tightened again. Diane leaned in beside him. Her eyes scanned quickly, then again. The confidence in her posture faltered for the first time all night. Evan noticed. Lena noticed too. Mark spoke slowly. These two deposits, they are not outgoing. Lena held his gaze. No. Diane frowned sharply. What do you mean? Mark tapped the paper lightly. These are incoming transfers. The room shifted again. Harder this time. Evan leaned forward despite himself. From where? Mark's eyes moved back to the line, then up to Lena. His voice was quieter now. Careful in a way it had not been earlier. These are reimbursements. Lena nodded once. Yes. Diane's lips parted slightly. Reimbursements from who? Lena did not look at her. Her eyes stayed on Mark. From the insurance appeal that finally cleared in late spring. The silence that followed was heavy, because now the clean accusation had a visible crack running through it. Mark leaned back slowly in his chair, still staring at the page. Processing, rebuilding. Evan's fingers loosened slightly against the edge of the table. And Diane, for the first time since the envelope hit the table, Diane Holloway did not immediately have another sharp answer ready. The shift in the room was no longer subtle. It sat there, heavy and unavoidable, like a chair that had been moved just enough for everyone to notice, but no one had acknowledged out loud. Mark was still staring at the page. His thumb tapped once against the margin, slow and distracted, the way he did when something refused to line up the way he expected. Lena watched him carefully. Not hopeful, not relieved. Just tired in a way that sat deep behind her ribs. Across the table, Evan finally leaned forward. His voice was quieter now. If the insurance paid some of it back, then why were the balances still off? It was the first question that did not sound like an accusation. Lena felt something in her chest pull tight, because that was the right question. And the answer was not clean, not comfortable. She'd exhaled slowly. Because the reimbursements did not cover everything. Mark's eyes lifted to her. How much was left uncovered? Lena hesitated. Just long enough for the old instinct to whisper again. Keep it simple. Do not make it uglier. But the night had already passed at that point. Her voice came out steady, even though her fingers had started to press lightly into the table again. Roughly 1/3 of the total. Evan's shoulders sank a fraction. Mark leaned back slowly in his chair, processing the number in real time. Diane, however, was not done. Her eyes narrowed again, though the earlier sharpness had dulled. That still does not explain the withdrawal 3 months ago. The air tightened again. Mark's head turned toward Lena. So did Evan's. Lena's stomach dropped. There it was, the one entry she had hoped would stay buried in the noise of everything else. Her pulse picked up. Slow, heavy. Mark's voice came careful now. What withdrawal? Diane tapped the second page with one finger. Mid-March. Large transfer. Not tied to therapy or medical billing. The room held still. Lena could feel the weight of all 3 of them watching her now. Waiting. Her throat tightened. Because this part had nothing to do with neat invoices or insurance delays. This part was personal, messy, and impossible to explain without opening a door she had kept shut for a long time. She inhaled slowly. That transfer was temporary coverage. Mark's brow pulled together. For what? Lena's fingers curled slightly against the table edge. She did not look at Diane. She did not look at the paperwork. She looked directly at Mark. For the tax shortfall on the rental property. Mark froze. Completely. Evan blinked. Diane's expression sharpened again, sensing movement. What rental property? The question came fast, too fast. Lena felt the familiar twist of tension in her chest. Because here it was, the piece she had protected out of habit, out of exhaustion, out of years of trying not to start fights over things Mark always said he would handle later. She spoke carefully. The duplex in Arlington. Mark's face changed. Not dramatically, but enough, because now the memory was catching up. The late property tax notice, the accounting delay from the management company, the week he had been out of state when the penalty window was closing. His voice came slower now. You said that was resolved through escrow. Part of it was. Lena held his gaze. Part of it was not cleared in time. Silence settled again. He stared at her, and for the first time that night there was something very different in his expression. Not certainty, not frustration. Something closer to unease. You covered the gap. Not a question. Lena nodded once. Yes. Diane's voice cut in again, but it no longer carried the same clean confidence. Why would you do that without saying anything? Lena finally leaned back in her chair. For the first time all night, the control on her face slipped just slightly, enough to show the fatigue underneath. Because every time I tried to flag property issues this year, it was never a good time. The words landed softly, but they did not miss. Mark's jaw tightened. Evan looked down at the table, and the divorce papers still sitting between the cake plates suddenly did not look nearly as final as they had an hour ago. No one spoke for several seconds. The silence was no longer sharp or accusing. Now it felt heavy, uncomfortable in a way that settled into the bones. Mark was the first to move. He leaned back slowly in his chair, one hand coming up to press briefly against his forehead. Not dramatic, just tired. The kind of tired that comes when a clean story starts to fall apart piece by piece. The duplex tax gap, he said slowly. His voice had lost its earlier edge. You paid it to stop the penalty window. Lena nodded once. Yes. Across the table, Evan's shoulders had lowered. Not fully relaxed, but no longer locked for a fight. Diane, however, was still searching for solid ground. Her fingers tapped lightly against her folded arms. Even if that is true, she said, the pattern still looked suspicious from the outside. It was the first thing she'd said all night that did not sound like a verdict. Lena did not argue, because Diane was not wrong about that either. From the outside, it did look messy. Her voice came quieter now. I know it did. The admission landed softly. Mark's eyes flicked toward her again, studying her in a way he had not done in months, maybe longer. Evan finally spoke. His voice was rougher than before. Why didn't you just sit us down and explain all of this? The question was not sharp, it was frustrated. And underneath that, something that sounded almost like regret. Lena's chest tightened. Because the answer was not dramatic, not noble, just painfully ordinary. She let out a slow breath. Because every time I tried to start that conversation, she paused, choosing the words carefully. It felt like everyone in this house was already too busy, too stressed, or too done listening. The words settled across the table. No one rushed to interrupt. Mark's gaze dropped briefly to the paperwork again. Thinking. Replaying. Diane shifted in her chair, less certain than she had been at the start of the night. That still doesn't explain why things escalated to this point, she said more quietly. Lena's fingers rested flat against the table now. No tremor. Just steady contact with the cool surface. Because small problems grow when they stay quiet too long. Her voice was calm, not defensive, just tired. Mark exhaled slowly through his nose. The sound carried more weight than anything he had said so far. Evan rubbed once across the back of his neck. A nervous habit Lena recognized immediately. He only did that when something was bothering him more than he wanted to admit. The birthday banner hanging behind him had started to tilt slightly to one side. The tape was coming loose. No one reached to fix it. Finally, Mark spoke again. His tone was different now, measured, careful. We should have asked more questions before tonight." The words landed gently, but they landed. Diane did not immediately respond. That alone said enough. Lena felt something complicated twist in her chest. Not relief, not victory. Just the slow, aching release of pressure she had been carrying for months. Maybe longer. But the envelope was still sitting there. The divorce papers still real. Still legal. Still waiting. Lena's eyes dropped to them briefly, then back to Mark. What happens now? It was the first question she'd asked all night that carried even a hint of uncertainty, because no matter how much the story had shifted, the damage from the way this night had started was not something that could be neatly folded away. Mark looked at the papers, then at Lena, then briefly at Evan. The room held its breath again, but this time, no one in the Carter family was completely sure what the next move was supposed to be. For a long moment, no one answered Lena's question. The banner behind Evan gave a soft peel as one corner of tape finally loosened and curled away from the wall. The word "birthday" sagged slightly in the middle. It felt like the room was doing the same thing. Mark rested both hands flat on the table. Not defensive, not closed off. Thinking. Really thinking now, in a way Lena had not seen from him in months. Maybe longer. The divorce papers sat between them, still crisp, still official, but no longer carrying the clean certainty they had when the envelope first slid across the table. Mark exhaled slowly. His voice, when it came, was quieter than it had been all night. "I should have asked you directly before filing." The words landed carefully, measured. Diane shifted immediately in her chair. "Mark," but he lifted one hand slightly. Not sharp, just enough to pause her. "I am not saying the concerns were wrong," he continued, eyes still on Lena, "but I am saying we moved too fast on conclusions." Lena felt something tight in her chest loosen and ache at the same time, because part of her wanted to feel vindicated. But mostly, she just felt tired. Evan had gone very still again. His eyes moved slowly between them, like he was trying to rewrite the last 2 hours in his head and could not quite make the pieces fit. Diane crossed her arms, but the earlier certainty was gone from her posture. "So, what are you suggesting?" she asked. Mark did not answer right away. He reached for the stack of statements again and flipped through them slowly, more methodically than before, checking the dates, the memos, the incoming reimbursements. Each page seemed to take a little more air out of the certainty that had filled the room at the start of the night. Finally, he set the papers down. "We need a full reconciliation. Practical, careful. Business language slipping back into place. Not a verdict, not a defense, a process." Diane frowned slightly. "That will take time." Mark nodded once. "Then we take the time." Evan leaned forward a little. His voice was quieter now, less sharp. "Does that mean you are not moving forward with this?" His eyes flicked toward the divorce papers. Mark followed the glance. The room went still again. Lena did not move, did not speak. Her hands rested flat against the table. But inside, her pulse had picked up again. Because this was the moment that mattered more than anything else tonight. Not the accusations, not the explanations. This. Mark's jaw tightened slightly as he looked at the envelope. When he finally spoke, his voice carried more weight than anything else he had said so far. "It means I filed based on incomplete understanding. Not an apology, but the closest thing to one he had offered in years." Diane inhaled slowly, clearly unhappy with the direction the night had taken. "So we just pause everything." Mark turned toward her. Not sharply, but firmly. "We review the facts properly." Evan's shoulders dropped another inch. Relief flickered across his face before he could hide it. Lena saw it, and something in her chest twisted painfully. because, despite everything tonight, she had never wanted him caught in the middle of this. Mark finally looked back at Lena fully. For the first time that evening, there was no performance in his expression, just fatigue, and something that might have been regret. "If the reconciliation confirms what you are saying," he said slowly, "then we correct the record." Lena held his gaze. Her voice came quiet but steady. "And if it does not?" Mark did not look away. "Then we deal with whatever the truth actually is." The words hung in the air. Honest, uncomfortable, real. No one rushed to speak after that. The cake had started to lean enough now that the top layer shifted slightly to one side. Frosting sliding. Structure weakening. No one reached to fix it, because everyone at the table understood something had already shifted tonight that could not be neatly put back the way it was. The divorce papers were still there. The questions were still there. The tension was still there. But the clean story that had started this birthday dinner was gone. No one touched the cake. The frosting had slipped enough now that a thin line of icing trailed down the side, pooling quietly at the base like something slowly giving way. Lena watched it for a moment. Funny what the mind focuses on when the rest of life feels unstable. Mark finally reached for the envelope. The soft scrape of paper against the table sounded louder than it should have. Everyone noticed, even Diane. He did not tear the papers. He did not slide them away dramatically. He simply rested his palm on top of them and exhaled. "We are not finishing this tonight." The words were calm, decisive. Diane straightened in her chair. "Mark." "Not tonight," he repeated, quieter but firmer. The edge in his voice was not anger, it was finality. For the first time since the party started, Diane did not immediately push back. Evan's shoulders lowered another notch. The tight line around his mouth softened in a way Lena had not seen all evening. But relief did not come cleanly to her. It came tangled, heavy, because damage does not disappear just because the room gets quieter. Mark turned toward Lena again. His voice had lost its earlier distance. "I should have come to you first. Simple, direct, late." Lena felt something inside her chest pull in two different directions at once. Part of her wanted to accept the shift. Part of her was still standing in the moment the envelope hit the table, still feeling every pair of eyes waiting for her to break. Her fingers pressed lightly into the edge of the table. "What matters now is what happens next," she said quietly. Mark nodded once. Agreed. There was a pause. Not hostile, not warm either, just careful. Evan finally spoke. His voice was rough in a way that made Lena's chest tighten again. "I did not know about the insurance gap." He was not looking at her. Not fully, but not avoiding her either. Lena kept her tone gentle. "You were not supposed to worry about that." A small breath left him. Something close to guilt flickered across his face. Diane shifted in her chair, clearly uncomfortable with how far the night had moved from her earlier certainty. "So, what exactly is the plan?" she asked. Mark answered this time without hesitation. "Full financial review, independent if necessary." His eyes flicked briefly toward Lena. Transparent, the word hung there. Not just about money, about everything. Lena gave a small nod. "That is fair." And it was, because whatever else tonight had revealed, trust in this house had been running on assumptions for too long. Mark carefully slid the divorce papers back into the envelope. Not torn, not dismissed, but no longer sitting like a verdict on the table. Just paused. The birthday banner finally gave way completely on one side and drooped lower behind Evan's chair. No one rushed to fix that either, because everyone at the table understood something quiet but important had already happened. The story they walked into dinner believing was not the full story, and now they all had to live with that. Lena slowly pushed her chair back and stood. Not dramatically, not storming out, just steady, tired, human. "I am going to clear the plates," she said softly. For a second, no one moved. Then Evan stood too. "I will help." The words were quiet, almost awkward, but real. Lena looked at him. Really looked. And for the first time that night, something in her expression softened. Just a little. Across the table, Mark watched them both. Not certain, not finished, but no longer convinced he understood everything that had been happening under his own roof. And Diane, for the first time in a very long time, had nothing left to say. The candles had burned all the way down. The frosting had slipped. The banner had fallen. But the truth, slow and stubborn, had finally started to surface. And this time, it was not going back under.